Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this live stream celebrating ITIL 4's second birthday. This is the second in a three series of live streams. Pardon me a second. I'll close the window. My church bells are going off in the background. So this is the second of in a series of three. We recorded one on Monday morning, and that was for the APAC region, joined by some lead architects in that part of the world, namely Erin Castile, Katrina McDermott, and Takashi Yagi. On Friday, we'll be running one around lunchtime in the UK, and that's going to feature lead architects in the EMEA region, mainly Stuart Rance, Barclay Ray, Roman Zhuravlev, and Marcel Federer. But today, we're focused on the Americas, on the lead architects from that part of the world. And joining me today is an absolutely fabulous panel, a brilliant group of people I'd love to call friends and colleagues in this program. First and foremost is Lou Honeybeck. Lou has been a long time involved with ITIL, going back to, I believe, the end of ITIL version 2, and certainly in ITIL version 3, you contributed in significant ways. With ITIL 4, Lou was not only a lead architect in the development of the foundation guidance, but she went on to be the lead editor for the Direct Plan and Improve book, as well as contributing her knowledge and wisdom to other books in the Managing Professional and series and for digital and IT strategy. And if I've got my geography correct, and I move from east to west, after Lou is going to come Troy Dumoulin.
I'm north.
Well, I'm going longitudinally here, but yes, Troy joins us from Toronto, I think, if I remember correctly. He's a very senior member of the Pink Elephant team up there in Toronto. He's of course a lead architect for ITIL 4, but he's also a long-time consultant, speaker. And I believe last year, Troy, you won like a Lifetime Achievement Award for your contributions to the field of service management as well. So for those of you who don't know, please do congratulate Troy in the comments. But Troy was also a lead architect, and he brought so much wisdom about not only what the market was looking for, but also how the product would play out as modules of training and learning. And he helped us craft guidance as well as our products to meet multiple stakeholder needs, to help us co-create value with multiple stakeholders within AXELOS as well as within the community. And last but certainly not least, going east to west, is my a good friend and a fellow metalhead as well, Mauricio Corona from Mexico City, Dr. ITIL, as he's known in some circles. Mauricio is a longtime contributor to ITIL and other service management frameworks and bodies of knowledge as well as being a lead architect for ITIL 4. Mauricio was also an author for Create, Deliver, and Support, and for Direct Plan and Improve, if I recall correctly. And of course, we benefit from his wisdom and guidance on a host of different things as well here at AXELOS. So I couldn't be more pleased to welcome all three of you to this panel discussion to celebrate ITIL 4 turning 2. Welcome.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Thank you.
So let's start by going back in time a bit, setting our old Mandalorian to let's say January 1st, 2017 or 2018. We were in the ITIL version 3 world then. What were some of the positive things that we saw in the ITSM community? What were some of the positive things we saw with ITIL version 3 and how it was being used by the community? And equally, if you want to share some of the challenges that you saw, that's also cool. So let's go back in time and reflect on what the world was like just before ITIL 4 was launched. So this time I'll go west to east. So Mauricio, I'll come to you first.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I would like to highlight that when we started working on this, I will say that one of the strongest part that I remember is that the IT service management, the service management, and now the enterprise service management community is very strong, is wide, is open, is always willing to learn new things. So I think that the strongest part that we had in that time is the community. And on the other side, what I will say is that yes, I strongly believe that we made a huge change from V2 to V3. A lot of organizations embrace those life cycle and the processes or practices right now. They embrace all of them, but of course, after 7 years from the starting of this project, that it was on 2011, that was the ITIL, let's say, the second edition of the ITIL V3. And I would say that 7 years, it's a lot. So I think that, yes, we found very good things, but as well, we found huge challenges. And I am pretty sure that we will discuss this later. So I would like to highlight that, the stronger community that we had.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was something that completely blew me away. How many people responded to our sort of call for contributors and for people to be involved in creating a product fit for the community. So going west to east, as I said, Troy, I'll come to you next. What were some of the positive things, and equally, what were some of the challenges that you saw at that time?
So actually, the interest that we saw in service management was very focused in the ITIL version 3. Most organizations, if they're going to be adopting so-called ITIL, they'd be thinking about production support issues. They'd be looking at incident, problem, transition into production. They were starting to get involved with more service catalog work, business relationship management. So that was some of the evolution. This was good and continual improvement, but it really was traditionally still focused on the infrastructure, at least the perception is. Even though since 2007, there was this life cycle strategy all the way through operations, most organizations, if you want to be honest, were simply doing the back end of that, service operations, a bit of service transition. And so I found the opportunity that we're going to discuss a great opportunity to widen the scope a little bit and talk about more systemic and kind of enterprise conversations of ITIL.
Excellent. And Lou, same question to you.
Sure. Well, I think that we're always struggling with the balance between something that is operationally focused, what can I do today, this moment, to handle my challenge, my problem, depending on what my scope of control is, and being able to step back and conceptualize and look at things more holistically. And the move to the life cycle approach that was articulated in ITIL 3 in the 2011 edition, this was a good way to begin to move people's thought processes. And as anything else, part of the community kind of accepted that very quickly and was excited by the opportunity to step back and look at a bigger picture and think of it more strategically, look at individual elements as part of a larger whole. But at the same time, we still had the people who were struggling to, yeah, but what about me? What about today? What about this thing that I worry about? And that's, I think, what's reflected in what Troy was saying about this kind of operations focus, or maybe we did a little bit more with catalog because we understood that a little bit better, or maybe we got more into business relationship management, that sort of thing. I always tell my clients, you can change people's behavior in a short period of time with a lot of focused attention, supervision, training, etc. But it takes 5 to 10 years to change a culture. Yeah. And that's really what we're here. So it's almost as if the guidance is always a little bit ahead of the cultural shift that follows it, Right. I think that we were helping to move people. The other thing that was still a challenge with the way the guidance was articulated in version 3, 2011, whatever you want to call it, is that it was still difficult for people who saw themselves in development, who saw themselves in other places, or who were starting to adopt agile perspectives, using lean techniques, etc., to see themselves in service management. We're struggling to help people to see that part of the picture. So while it was definitely a leap forward and helped, it also helped, I will say, that the qualifications were broad, unlike back in V2, where the qualifications really lasered in on a very small piece of ITIL. And that kind of exacerbated this lack of strategic perspective. So we were starting to move away from that in ITIL 3 in 2011, but there still was a great deal more work to do. So a good move in the right direction, but more to do.
All fair points, and I'll also chuck my throw my 2 cents in for consideration. Well, it's interesting I use the phrase 2 cents because I think of this positive and this benefit as sort of two sides of the same coin. I think there was starting to become well, we were starting to see a fair amount of maturity and, dare I say it, commodification in the toolset space. I wasn't starting to see much in the way of differentiation or between all the major tool sets that we had out there. They were starting to get really mature when it came to their out-of-the-box workflows. And sure, there was some amount of customization, or there was some amount of configuration that needed to be done to the out-of-the-box tool set to make it fit for purpose for the context of the organization that was implementing it. But I think the dark side of that was that many organizations started to see these tool sets as the solution to the problem rather than an enabler of an overall solution. So they were saying, well, if we implement this tool set, it will solve this problem. Well, you know, it was a component of that solution, but you still needed to make sure that you were taking people along the journey, that you were changing your ways of working, etc. Just implementing a tool, regardless of how good those tools were. And there are numerous great tools out there. But I think a lot of companies started to see the tool as the solution, not a component of a solution. And that worried me because tools for me are really great at many routine things, but they're not a replacement for empathy or human cognition, right? We've all been frustrated with, you know, calling in to speak to an airline or speak to a bank or whatever it might be, where, you know, we're asked to say a short phrase, which will hopefully direct our call to the right place. And that technology is great. It's got a long way to go, but it's not perfect, right? And we get frustrated because we just want to be able to talk to someone sometimes. And I think the same sort of things were playing out for me across the service management space, which is why when it came to ITIL 4, I was really thrilled that we all sort of agreed that we needed to emphasize the human factors in service management, whether that's the employee as regarded as human beings or the customers regarded as human beings and so on. That was something that I thought was worthy of sharing.
I'd like to actually riff on that a little bit, if you don't mind. So I wrote an article called The Human Side of Organizational Velocity. And velocity in its own right is speed with direction, right? So an organization, a complex system doesn't go fast unless all the agents of that system share the same values, beliefs, practices, and priorities. Because if they don't, then we don't get velocity at all. Even if we get speed in the individual parts, they go in different directions. We forget that the real goal is organizational change. You got 5, 10 different people. They all have different beliefs, different practices. The real trick is actually getting them to agree that they should even agree to agree. Okay, now that we got this sense of we the people and we would collaborate against shared goals, well, let's figure out what it is we're going to do and what means we're going to use to do it. So the process or practice and or the tool are only enablers to the goal. The real goal was creating alignment and cohesion around a group of people. And ITIL and the tools that go with it are really reference models and enablers to accelerate that goal, but they're not the goal themselves. And so we lost track of the real goal by focusing on the enablers. That's exactly what you were saying.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Maurizio.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, I would like to add, I totally agree with this, and I think that the cultural part is the main issue. We must recognize that technology is changing very quickly. Organizations change slowly, and the cultural stuff on that, the cultural side on that organizations changes slower. So I think that I completely understand that. I am really happy with the outcome that we got on the ITIL side. In which sense? Well, as some of you know, I opened a second company. I think that 3 years. So we are working a lot with robotic process automation, with data analytics in every single layer, from data governance to machine learning. We are deploying robotics. We are working with several organizations in the Middle East and in Japan in order to do that. And when people contact me and say, "Hey, Mauricio, I want you to help me to introduce all of these new advanced technology into our organizations," the discussions always starts the same from my side, and it is okay. First of all, we need to start thinking about what is your main goal as an organization, what you want to achieve. The second part is we need to discuss the digital mindset on your cultural issues around the company. And then we can select any kind of advanced technology that you want. But you can go backwards, you know. A lot of people just arrive and say, hey, Mauricio, I want to start doing data analytics. And I say, okay, that's good. But what do you want me to start doing? And they start talking about, oh, we already hired some Hadoop experts and we're going to work on machine learnings and I already have. And I said, okay, did you know that for starting these kind of things, you need data engineering, you need data scientists, and you need data specialists on the business? And it's pretty much like, let's just focus on that and let's go in, start working from top to down. And that's why when I started realizing that as soon as we launched ITIL, I said, well, it is amazing because you know that I have been very passionate about ITIL since I think that maybe 15 years ago. And now that's the main framework that I am using in order to start creating the strategy for the right digital transformation. So this has been really, really satisfying. Look, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, not at all. It's a team sport. Although I have to say, the little guy to your right who keeps blinking is freaking me out. That is a big challenge that we've always experienced. Sorry, I should have said your left, my right. Even the guidance of ITIL itself, people have sometimes treated it as though it was the objective. You know, that we're going to do ITIL. You know, well, what the heck does that mean? You know, as opposed to saying we are trying to be able to do these things better. We want to achieve better outcomes. We want to work more effectively with our partners and our suppliers. We want to what? You know, what are your objectives? Why are you looking for assistance from technology-based tools, from guidance like ITIL or Agile or DevOps or any of those? Why? What are you trying to accomplish? And then you can leverage those tools, those frameworks in appropriate and meaningful ways. But the degree to which people they want an easy out. It's like someone who says, well, I want to get fit, and they just want to take a pill, you know, and poof, I'll be fit. Well, no, I'm sorry. You're going to have to eat less, move more, and do a few other things. What?
Did we accidentally trigger somebody's voice assistant?
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But
it's following the conversation. Sorry, yeah.
So, you know, the idea that ITIL can evolve and become more useful, more accessible, more comprehensive, more holistic is important. And I think we've been trying to achieve that in the work that we've done. But no matter what we do with the ITIL guidance, it does not absolve people from the responsibility for applying critical thought to how they use it, and that's a big challenge. So
that's absolutely correct, and that actually triggers a memory because I think Troy was the one who pointed this out to me. I think I'm skipping ahead very slightly towards the to a point where we'd actually finished the main sort of body of authoring project on the foundation book, and I think it was in a conversation Troy pointed out to me that every version of ITIL has expanded the scope of what service management means. ITIL version 2 was very infrastructure focused. Certainly within the service delivery book, service strategy book, service delivery and service support. And then ITIL version 3 came along and increased the scope and talked about the life cycle and introduced elements of strategy and design and so on. And then ITIL 4 then came along to introduce new practices or reintroduce practices perhaps that may have been mentioned in passing in ITIL version 1 or version 2. But so it was a very interesting observation that as the world has gotten more complex in some ways, the world of service management has gotten more complex, ITIL has, in a way, increased the scope of topics it needs to be able to talk about so that practitioners get a sense of what service management means in that era.
In fact, actually, what I like to say is that ITIL never invents anything. The gift of ITIL is three things: aggregation, integration, and codification. At any given moment in our history, the framework has basically done this. What's out there? What are we talking about? What's important to us? Let's bring it all together now and look at it systemically. Look at it together as opposed to individual parts. Wait, they're not individual parts. They're integrated. They're one system. So let's republish a new picture. And so every major version of ITIL has never invented anything. It's simply it's a lag indicator, but it's a tool we can use to talk about context, because context is incredibly important. And if I had to say the major difference between a previous version of ITIL and this one is that before we looked at things a la carte, let's talk about service desk or change or asset or config. Now we have to look at them systemically because it's all connected. Everything relates to everything. And I really find it interesting because people, not so much anymore. They used to say, well, Troy, convince me we should do ITIL. Like, I said, wait a minute. Well, don't you today have conversations with customers about where they're going? Yeah. And you make some plans and develop some blueprints and designs? Yeah. And then you got to give it someone who actually gets something done? Yeah. And then you've got to actually move it to production without breaking everything? Yes. And then you get the honor and privilege of supporting it. Yes. Congratulations. You're doing ITIL, every part of it already. You don't pick whether you do it or not. You just pick up which pieces of it you actually want to focus on with intent versus ad hoc.
I think that use of that word is so important, Troy, the use of the word intent, because I think that that's something that I see a lot of organizations struggling with, is just the ability to step back from the minutia that they've got their brains preoccupied with and conceptualize something so that they can actually see the big stroke mistakes they're making. I'm so glad that you used that word. It's
a good word. So let's fast forward by about 6 months. So we're now in 2018. We had multiple in-person workshops where we brought everybody together in London for week-long workshops. And of course, when we dispersed, we were working over email and multiple Teams, Zoom, etc. calls, late nights, early mornings, as the case may be. Lou, I'll come to you first with this question. What's your sort of fondest memory, if you will, from the ITIL 4 foundation development days? Anything stand out? Or any contribution that you personally made that you think, you know what, I'm really proud that I wrote this bit?
Well, I think there are two things. One is I'm really proud of, people may not be aware, but before ITIL 4 came out, there was one publication that AXELOS brought forward that I was integrally involved with, which was the ITIL Practitioner Guide. And the one thing that I consider to be my biggest contribution, triumph, if you will, would be getting the guiding principles into the practitioner guidance, and those then have evolved and become something that's integral to ITIL 4. But I think it's important to realize how that came about, because we've been talking about the scope of ITIL expanding over time, and there are so many other frameworks, methodologies, best practices, etc., whatever you want to call them. When we were working on practitioner, we kept arguing about all these other things we needed to talk about. If someone's trying to take the ITIL guidance and apply it and be successful, what should they know? What should they think about? And we just came up with a plethora of things. And we couldn't possibly mention or talk about them all. And then, of course, some of them are proprietarily owned by someone, so you can't do that. But, so my thought was, well, look, there are certain thoughts that are espoused in these things, and some of them are common among multiple frameworks, methodologies, best practices. Why don't we distill out that? And that's where the guiding principles came from. So I was very proud that those things were deemed to be important enough, valuable enough to move on and continue to evolve into what they are in ITIL 4. One of my fondest memories of the ITIL 4 development just forgetting the fact that traveling to another city to work together, it seems so long ago. There was one day where we were trying to look at how we could literally architect ITIL 4 to be really practical and useful and get at all the important things that people would need. And we'd made massive stacks of Post-its that had topics on them. And here we were working around a room, grouping them together into logical groupings and just trying to figure out, well, how can we put these together to really help someone? And it was such an exciting collaboration. There were all these minds at work, and it was all focused on practical outcome, what will really be useful and meaningful to the users of this guidance. And that is just one of my best memories of this process.
Amazing. I do share a recollection of one of those exercises. I think I'd written out all 26 ITIL version 3 processes and 4 functions on across 30 Post-it notes and put a line of masking tape along the wall. And I said, all right, if we want to keep this in ITIL 4, it goes over the line. If we want to drop it, it goes under the line. And there were just so many debates of what goes over the line and what stays under the line. That was a good discussion. But Troy, let's come to you. What would be one of your fondest memories, and equally something that you are especially proud of as a contributor?
Yeah, so Lou mentioned lean earlier. I'm a passionate lean advocate, and those folks on the call will know this. I fell in love with lean, applied to IT, going back to the Lean IT book by Steve Bell and Mike Orzin, and then their subsequent book, Run, Grow, Transform. They invited me to participate in that too. And I had begun already thinking about flow and velocity and value change and value streams before we ever got together in this group. And I remember presenting kind of an early view of the current ITIL value chain. Wouldn't it be better just if we could actually align the practices in the context of value creation and how work is done? And so the other element of that was the systems thinking mindset from Peter Senge, and that's a major now part of this. And there were several other people who also were lean advocates, like Lou and Mauricio, and a couple other, Stuart as well, I believe, also very passionate about lean. And it just took off like wildfire. So we turned this circle into a way of people actually working collaboratively, get together. And so that was, to me, one of my most passionate, the value stream orientation of the framework.
Amazing. Mauricio, over to you.
Yeah.
Same question.
Well, I will say that from my point of view, what I'm really proud of it is to bring into the table an outsider view, much more further than Europe, US, and Canada. It was much more like trying to challenge everyone on the table that when we have to make decisions, we need to behave with global mind thinking. It was really, really important for me. And I am really proud that after, I just remember, we just get back into a new workshop in London and we discussed it again and again and again. And it was the name of capabilities versus practice. It was.
That's you. That's all.
It was. I was just taking my flight into London again, and I was getting back, and I was just saying, "Oh my gosh, I am sure that we are going to discuss again if this is going to be a capability or if this is going to be a practice." And I was, "Oh my God." And I think that we heavily discussed that on three workshops. 3 workshops. Those were that was one of the most debated arguments. But so I am proud of it. I am very happy of this outcome. And on the other side, what I would say is that what I saw plenty of agreements, but as well I saw a lot of disagreement. And as Troy just mentioned, it is not just like, okay, this is invented and it's just we just write it down and put it in some box. No, we have a lot of agreements and disagreements, and we run a lot of research in our respective areas, countries, with a lot of hundreds and thousands of people across the globe. So I think that that's very important. Why is that? Because if we we want to say, okay, this is a best practice. Okay, who says that this is a best practice? Well, what's the process behind it? And that's really powerful, because you know that, okay, now I understand that there is a complete methodology behind it. And I was very pleased that AXELOS worked on a really nice way, that methodology. And on the other side, yes, we have the main workshop with all of the lead architects. But on the other side, we got additional people that were invited. And I just remember, for example, when Mark Smalley arrived into the room, and he just started drawing, and then the concept about the co-creation of value just arriving to the table, and everyone was like, wow, that's something good. Okay, that's something that, yes, it will help us to address this issue and this issue and this issue. And we was trying to put exactly the name, and that kind of interactions with the lead architect and with the other invited people, specialists that, of course, well, later Mark just became the author of the HBIT. But that was really richness, the process the process that we ran in order to provide the final outcome. So I am very pleased and very happy about that. And this is, I think that it's very important for every single people that we work it into the room, because we simply will not going. I said, okay, if I am not totally convinced about the outcome of this workshop, I will not push this forward into my region. If I am not convinced about that, I will not follow this. So I think that at the end of the whole process, we all finish it with happiness sensation that it was okay. This was a really good outcome. So I'm very pleased about that.
I want to bring something up about what Maurizio said in terms of the global perspective. Just as a kind of a side note that I think some people don't quite get, particularly if English is their first language, is that when we come together and try to create the lexicon, what words will be used in ITIL to refer to this, that, or the other thing, it's not enough to find a word in English that expresses the thought correctly, but we have to remember also, how well will this word translate? Because there were times when we would discuss what something should be called, and when the minute we found out how that word would translate, it couldn't work. It was not going to function in a global environment. So, that's something that I think people sometimes don't get, is I hear people say, oh, well, you really should have called that XYZ. But there's a reason why we ended up with certain terminology, and it's not a perfect world, because it's not a perfect world.
I'll share a couple of memories. I've already shared a few, and Mauricio, I do remember that workshop where I think it was Mark Smalley and Christian Nissen, who then went on to become the lead editors of High Velocity IT and Drive Stakeholder Value, who came in and they laid out service dominant logic and explained so many of those underlying concepts that I remember my mind was blown that day. Definitely had to have a couple of aspirins at the end of that day just to recover from it. Rather than repeating some of the memories that have been shared today, I'll talk about some of the stuff that happened on the AXELOS side, because I not to toot my own horn, but I like to think of myself as someone who's fairly good at visualizing concepts. I might not be a terribly good writer, but I can create a nice looking diagram that gets the point across. And I remember, I probably still have somewhere, the first sketches of what the service value chain was. And I remember I'm not going to say who, but one of the pieces of feedback I got from a couple of people in AXELOS was, it was a very 1980s consulting diagram that would have been found from like McKinsey or KPMG or something like that, which I was like, okay, that's kind of fair. Consulting is my background, but I was really pushed to try to start to visualize things a lot differently. And I think that's how we, working with graphics designers and other people, that's how we came up with the diagrams of the service value chain and the service value system, and a lot of the other things that you see in the foundation book. In terms of writing, the only the significant piece of writing that I remember doing for ITIL Foundation was the progress iteratively with feedback guiding principle, because I remember in one of the workshops I read a blog post that Stuart Rance, who was another lead architect, he'll be on our show on Friday. He was talking about how iterative progression, which was a guiding principle that was mentioned in ITIL Practitioner, was really, really good. But how do you know if you've iterated in the right way? And I remember bringing this up, and we sort of all agreed that yes, we need to throw in that feedback loop. And I went away and I was asked to write a couple of pages on progress iteratively with feedback. And I remember coming back with like 10 pages with multiple diagrams and all that sort of stuff, of which only I think I gave it to Mauricio, and I think only about a third of that ended up in the final version of what progress iteratively looked at. But I'm very fond of. I know I said I'm a bad writer. The fact that I produced 10 pages to me is an indication of how bad a writer was, because instead of sticking to the brief and trying to condense something down to 2 pages, I had to take 10 pages to get the point across. But I'm very proud of that, because it forced me to go away and research a lot more into lean thinking, into flow, into agile ways of working, and then see how that could be applied to service management, and then condense all that to a comfortable 10 pages. It's interesting, on Monday's live stream, I think Erin also recalled our one evening that we all ended up going out for drinks after a really long day of sort of hammer and tongs going at each other, and we ended up in a place called Fogg's Residence, I think, and she still remembers that place to this day.
My favorite.
It's a very nice bar. So let's. I see we've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience, but let's fast forward a little bit more now and put ourselves in sort of end of 2019, coming into 2020, and up to today. What's the reception to ITIL 4 been in your part of the world? What have you seen? And Troy, I'll come to you first with this question.
So something Lou said earlier is very true. A lot of the community that we live in couldn't see themselves in the previous model, in the previous visuals. Even though we had left the infrastructure library a long ways ago, we still had the acronym, and it was, you got your ITIL and I got my Agile, and she's got her DevOps, and et cetera, et cetera. And they didn't see their themes, their values kind of visualized and how they fit in the overall picture. And as they see now where ITIL's going, 7 principles and all those, agile themes and iterative, flow conversations and collaborate and visual management, they see themselves. They can self-identify. And I jokingly call the value chain like a mall map, because people can actually say, I live here. and they can self-identify with the whole picture, whereas they couldn't see themselves in the previous versions, and they couldn't see their area. And one of the major things for me was this concept of creating the systems of how we all collaborate, or should. And one of the things I often say when I'm presenting the value chain is, look at these activities in the value chain. First of all, you don't implement it. You already have one. You don't implement the value chain. It exists. And it's more like a dashboard of whether you're doing well in a certain area or not, because any one of those activities can be red, green, or yellow in the context of just how well is it going. But I asked the question, can any one activity deliver value or enable value realization in isolation? And they think about it, and they say no. I said, exactly. You need at least 2. It takes a village, right? And so the whole principle of the value chain and value system is you can't go it solo. You cannot work in an isolated solo-based mindset and co-create value. It takes 2 to tango.
That's actually pretty interesting. I haven't thought about it that way. What's the minimum number of value chain activities an organization might be investing in? And I'll have to go away and think about that, Troy. Thank you for that.
It makes sense, yeah.
You need them all, but you need at least 2 to do anything.
Absolutely.
I shall have to go away and think about that. That's got me thinking now.
Makes sense.
Mauricio, I'll come to you with the same question. I mean, you work, of course, primarily out of Mexico City, but you do a lot of work across South American countries as well as if I remember correctly, with your work with SDI International, you've been doing some work in the Middle East as well. How have you seen ITIL 4 land in these different regions?
Very interesting. This year, it was the first time I was asked to speak to the Arabic world. That's, hey, Mauricio, I need you to speak about ITIL 4 to the Arabic world. And I was like, okay, that's good. So that tells us a lot about what they are thinking. Because yes, I have delivered several sessions, even while I was in Dubai. I was delivering several sessions in that part of the world. But now the scope, it is broader. Now there were plenty of people from Lebanon and from UAE and other parts of the Arabic world. And it was really, really nice, even from Egypt, I think. So I started seeing that for the first time this year. And of course, since we launched the first book, that it was the foundations, of course, Latin America, you know, they have always been countries that they are willing to learn and to understand how more advanced countries are doing, are executing the best practices, and it wasn't. It was exactly the same case. As soon as we launched it, the adoption started immediately. But as we previously discussed on the workshops in London, we said, okay, well, that's good, but we need to start working on the translation. And what I saw is that, well, AXELOS moved really, really quickly. I had and I have the opportunity to keep working with it as SME with on the Spanish side. And now I can see that, for example, the ITIL Foundation book is available in Japanese, it's available in Spanish, of course in English. It's available in 2 more languages, at least in 5. And the ITIL 4 Foundation certification course is the certification is the exam certification is available in at least 10 different languages. So I think that those are enablers, very important enablers, because as we all know, yes, I will say yes, okay, English, it's like the common language on which we are interacting across the globe. But as I always say, okay, the southern you go in the Latin American region, the less they understand English, and that's an issue, and that's something that inhibits every single thing that we have kept in mind. I just remember that from the very beginning, the first workshop that we have is, okay, guys, one of the main challenges is that we need to address global concerns. Global, we need to think global. And sometimes in the heat of the discussions, we forget that, but then we get back and just start reasoning, okay, no, this is going to work well. This is not, just as Lou mentioned, we need to think a lot about that. And I think that the wider we are achieving with localized material, the higher the growth that we are going to have on this matter. So I think that it's going really, really good. And if we keep this pace, this is going to grow even more. Excellent.
And Lou, I mean, you're based out of New York, but you've got one foot in the tool space. You've got one foot in the consulting space as well, certainly across North America. How have you seen ITIL 4 land in your work over the last couple of years? What success have you seen?
Yeah, I guess being mostly in the United States, particularly since COVID, and being for the last 4 years tied to an integrator, sort of ServiceNow integrator, I think what I've seen is the challenges that still remain, particularly in the United States, because in the United States, there's this arrogance of, oh, ITIL, yeah, we know that. Yeah, that stuff. Okay, yeah. So those people who are already believers in ITIL and see the value and have seen it evolve, they were interested in ITIL 4. Whether or not they felt they had the time to deal with it was a separate question, because, you know, we're all tap dancing as fast as we can already. But those organizations that did not have a particular bent toward ITIL, or where it was really just lip service to best practice, or perhaps they'd made a significant investment in using ITIL principles quite a while ago and thought they'd been there, done that, that's a much higher hill to climb. So getting people to recognize that, hey, this ain't your grandma's ITIL. and to be able to demonstrate tangible value in a very difficult market is challenging. And if the tool vendors aren't adopting the language either, and unfortunately, particularly in my country, a lot of the way people learn the language of these things is through what the tool vendors bring to them, then that creates a challenge. So I do believe that there's a great deal of challenge still in the US market for accepting and growing the use and efficacy of ITIL 4. So I think there's a lot there that can be leveraged, but it will take a concerted effort to reach out to those people that just think they already know.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I mean, a lot of what we talk about is behavioral. I mean, I won't go so far as to say it's academic or theoretical. I think it's grounded in a lot of practical experience. But at the same time, people come out of the class and go back into their workplaces, and the tangible nature of what they've learned comes through the tools that they use, the tickets that they create, the workflows that they follow, and so on. So I do definitely agree that, you know, tool sets play a large part. I mean, on that note, I think I've seen a number of tool vendors now, sort of as part of regular conversations that I have with them, starting to talk about how their customers or even their prospects are starting to talk about ITIL 4, or starting to pepper in ITIL 4 language, or if they're a little bit further in their learning, you know, directly referencing a guiding principle or something like that.
Well, and I must say that in my dealings with clients, if I use some of the terminology and I start talking about value chain and I start talking about practices and things of that nature, and I've been using guiding principles for a very long time, so that's not new for me. That does get people's attention, and they don't necessarily know that it's attached to ITIL 4. They just know it makes sense to them. So when we talk about workflow, when we talk about you know, finding the bottlenecks and driving efficiency into the journey from demand to value, that makes sense to them. So connecting the dots to help them recognize these are concepts that you can learn more about by leveraging the ITIL 4 framework. And then the other thing is making sure that those of us who are kind of connected to ITIL, that we're not just talking to the usual suspects, that we're not just judging the success of ITIL by how it resonates within the already established ITIL community, service management community. So maybe there's good uptake in that community, but that's just a microcosm of all the people and organizations, and not just IT. Obviously, these principles are portable. It doesn't matter whether what you're doing is, you know, IT is great and that's the core market, but even well beyond that, these principles are portable. So to me, that's the vast vista out there of opportunity that remains largely unaddressed.
Sure. And I think my marketing team would be very cross with me if they're listening, if I didn't mention the library of case studies that has come out since we launched ITIL 4. I mean, I think the first ITIL 4 case study was published towards the end of 2019, so even before ITIL 4's first birthday, and that was with a company in the aviation space, and it was talking about how they used the guiding principles to start to introduce improvements across the organization. And since then, you know, we've published case studies from Spotify, which is not a data center or an infrastructure case study. It's actually Spotify's development teams using ITIL. I think I think both you, Lou, and Mauricio referenced ESM. Earlier this year, we published a case study from CERN, you know, Large Hadron Collider out in Geneva, and that is not only how ITIL helped the IT team, but then how those same approaches helped their facilities team. So, you know, we're starting to see some of ITIL 4's concepts landing outside of the sort of core IT space even. And that's very gratifying to see. So for those of you in the audience who want to find out more about these case studies, certainly, you know, you can find a lot of case studies online. Some of them can be found on the AXELOS website, as they can on the Pink Elephant website, I'm sure, where we talk about the successes many companies have had adopting ITIL. And Mauricio, on the point you raised about translations, just a little plug here as well that I believe the drive stakeholder value and high velocity IT exams are going to be available in French, German, and Spanish from the middle of next month. So that'll be the whole of the MP suite. So we are continuing to translate as quickly as we can. There's a lot of checks and balances that go into these translations, not just exam question translations, but even core guidance development, as Lou was saying and Mauricio was saying, the challenges of practice versus capability, and that was just one of many debates that we had internally.
Yeah, that's right. And I know that AXELOS is even working further than those two books, but well, I knew that this information actually, but I'm under NDA and I do not know what I say or what I can't, but it's really good to know that this is complementary. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in from the audience, which I thought we could talk about. And Troy, I'll come to you with the first question, if that's okay. And that is from Jyoti. How useful do you think ITIL is for cloud platforms like AWS and Azure? Now, I assume it's not the question is, well, the question could be interpreted in two ways. I'm just literally reading it off. It could be how useful is ITIL for Amazon Web Services and the Azure team, or it could be interpreted as how useful is ITIL for consumers of AWS and Azure. So you can interpret however you want, but what would you say to Jyoti?
I'm going to answer it a couple of different ways. First of all, I'll plug for the book High Velocity IT. So that's one of my favorite classes to talk about, because what it talks about is we have a lot of advanced techniques for gaining velocity, increasing the use of digital technology and digital strategy is one of those. And so cloud services obviously falls into that, but there's a lot of practices in the DevOps movement like blue-green or canary releases. All of those techniques are good for gaining velocity and speed to market, but they still have to work with the management practices of receiving demand and producing value. And so what the High Velocity book does in the ITIL library is takes the technical practices and the management practices and looks at how they weave together. And so the very question about how does it fit with this concept of cloud is dressed right in that course and in that book specifically, and then certifications go with it. But there's another element to that, because really cloud is simply another word for third-party integration. And so one of the truths of our current age is that we're seeing more and more commoditization of specific technologies. And any time in history where technology is commoditized, our sourcing strategy changes. So Nicholas Carr talks about this in The Big Switch, right? At one point, we generated our own power, and then eventually we bought it through the wall. And so this is a truism of all technologies as they are adopted and as they are commoditized. We introduce more third-party integration. And so really the question becomes now, how do I integrate more successfully a more complex supply model, where a good part of what I'm offering is subcontracted to partners? Cloud is just one of those options, because that's all that cloud is it's basically another level of sourcing. Now, you can't do cloud without standards. Standard artifacts, standard configurations, standard images, standard deployment methodology. You can't do CI/CD without standards either. You got to have that all front-ended by a service catalog, right? Because I've got to find a way to quickly navigate to something and find a Buy Me Now button, and up she goes, right? Based on entitlement and authorization, access management. So you really can't do cloud, if you want to use that term, without understanding the integration of the technical practices and the management practices.
It's a fair point. I think I'll add a couple of more points to that, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. First is, if you look at the model that we introduced in Foundation, which was the 4 dimensions of service management, mm-hmm. Cloud is definitely up there in the information technology dimension. Sorry, couldn't find the right word for a moment. And clearly you have a relationship with your cloud solution provider. So it sort of straddles 2 of those dimensions. But there are other things not only in those dimensions, but in the other 2 dimensions as well, which you ignore at your peril. You need to make sure that you have the right people, the right skills, the right funding models, the right governance, the right ways of working. All of these come together and integrate or blend together in some way to create the results you want to see from your cloud consumption. So I would say it's critical to understand. I think it's critical to consume the right type of cloud services, but also to understand that there's a lot more than just the technology of the cloud that you need to pay attention to, especially as more and more things get automated away and you don't have to start worrying about them. There are other things which are more complex that you have to grapple with. The other thing I'll say on that point, and self-plug, I host a podcast. It's called you can search for the AXELOS Global Best Practice Podcast. And the last episode was talking about trends in ITSM tooling. And I had a guy called Jay Srinivasan, who's the CEO of a startup called @Spoke, on as a guest. And he uses this beautiful term, the Cambrian explosion of SaaS providers. We're seeing a huge explosion in the number of SaaS providers, which in turn are running off their own clouds as well, or subcontracting clouds. So the world has become a lot more complex, and ITSM tools are now sort of the equivalent of what that message bus used to be. For those of you who remember in our audience, the message bus from the SOA days back in the 90s, the tool, that core central ITSM tool is now sort of the way in which communication happens across different parts of your organization. It doesn't actually do the work, but it's your communication vehicle. And it becomes even more critical as you increase the number of integrations to third-party cloud solutions.
And
yeah, go ahead, Mauricio.
I will just two quick recommendations. The first one is go to My AXELOS website and download its infrastructure and platform management practice. That's the first suggestion. And the other one is just keep in mind to all of the audience that this is an ongoing work, and we are pushing really hard to AXELOS in order to develop new additional material. And we completely understand that the future is coming. Yes, we have the traditional data centers, but we are moving forward to fog data centers, and we are entering into the edge computing. And there is going to be a lot of things to do across these three main sites. Traditional data centers is going to be on hundreds across the globe. The fog will be on thousands, and the edge computing will be on hundreds of thousands of devices that must be processed. So we are working on that, and I think that you should be looking forward to it.
We have a few more minutes, and I'm wondering whether to open this question up. And it's possibly the subject of its own live stream discussions. But Troy, you were talking a lot about some of the outside influences and and systems thinking, and that's why I thought of this, directing this question to you again, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. This was actually a question that came in the first live stream that we didn't get to address, but since when you started talking about systems thinking and other sort of influences, I was reminded of this. And there's a lady, I think a trainer and consultant out in Australia, who asked this question. Was the service value chain in some way related to Michael Porter's principles and models?
Michael Porter is working from just general business logic. All organizations, and we use that word as a scalable thing in ITIL, a single person to a large a national brand is an organization, have a value chain. They receive demand. They have to correlate and prioritize that demand. They have to synchronize their resources through planning, investment, and architecture and supplier strategy. They have to then, organize around getting work done and then moving it to a live environment. All organizations have, in essence, a value chain. And you either see it or you don't. And you can't govern or manage what you can't see, which is the principle called Jidoka out of Lean. You cannot govern or manage what you're not aware of. And so when Michael Porter or even Peter Senge have, they introduce concepts like value chain or systems thinking, they didn't invent these things. These are, I dare to say, hundreds of years old concepts. They just become more popularized now in a world where we have to gain velocity across the system. We can't think at an activity level. We have to think systemically.
And possibly we might have you back on a podcast or a live stream. I hope that we can explore that question to its full extent. But since we are starting to come up to the top of the hour, let me pause here and wrap things up. So I'd like to thank all of you again for making the time to come on the show today. Lou, if people want to find you or contact you about anything you've spoken about today, what's the best place to find you?
Probably the best place to find me is either through LinkedIn, just use my name, and then my contact information is attached to my profile there, so I'm happy for you to use that information. So that's probably the easiest and fastest way.
Excellent. And Troy, if people want to contact you to discuss any of the things you've shared with us today?
LinkedIn is also good, but I've also had a blog that I've been contributing to since 2006 around these concepts. So if these things are interesting, I've been speaking and talking about them for a long time. It's on pinkelephant.com.
Sorry, I think I spoke over you very slightly there. Could you repeat that website address?
www.pinkelephant.com, top right corner, blogs, key author Troy.
Excellent. And last but certainly not least, Mauricio, where can people find you if they want to talk about anything we've discussed today?
Yeah, for sure. You can find me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. That will lead you straight to my YouTube channel. So just Mauricio Corona and you will find me.
You've got all the socials, right? TikTok, Snapchat.
Not yet, not yet. I don't think I will have the time for that, but let's see it.
All right. And for those of you who want to contact me at Blowboy on Twitter or on LinkedIn as well, you can also send an email in to ask@axelos.com. Clearly, axelos.com itself has the content hub where we've got a lot of case studies. But if you're looking for some of the specific practices that we've talked about today, there's a section of the AXELOS website called My AXELOS, where you'll find digital copies of all 34 practices, as well as a lot of additional content like templates and toolkits and white papers and so on. So it's definitely worth a visit to have a poke around and find some of that useful information. So again, thank you to our lovely panel for joining us today, and to the audience out there, thank you for giving us your time. And until we speak again, please stay safe, remember to wear a mask and wash your hands.